Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Front Row. Today we are joined by Chami Akmeemana, who has had a very exciting career, and we're going to talk to him today about blockchain. So Chami is the CEO of the Blockchain Learning Group and Blockscale Solutions. He's previously held roles with the Ontario Securities Commission as a fintech advisor. He's a successful entrepreneur who has made 4 successful exits, and he's really passionate about the intersection between technology and public policy, social good, etc. So that's what we're going to talk to him a little bit about. Chami, good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Visit to Colombo. Chami, I want to start off by asking you, blockchain is now this big buzzword. Some folks kind of understand what it's all about, whereas others don't really. So could you give us a very quick helicopter view of what blockchain is and what this buzz is all about?
Sure. I'd say blockchain is at its infancy right now. It's I would liken it to the internet back in the early 1990s. But it's important to understand at a very high level what the technology is. So it is essentially a distributed database system that is continuously verified and updated by its participants. So it is politically decentralized. What that means is there's no single governing organization. It's architecturally decentralized, which means there's no single point of failure, and it's logically centralized. And what this means in a broader spectrum to the community is these things empower citizens. This essentially gives power back to the citizen. We've spent the last several decades building intermediary systems because parties didn't trust each other, people didn't trust each other, so we built an intermediary to act as the go-to. What that adds to the system is latency, cost of transactions, etc. But through blockchain technology, we are now gradually pulling those intermediaries out and, I guess, making for optimizing systems in a much more optimized way.
So we hear about the use of blockchain from fintech to cryptocurrency to national ID cards and all of these different uses. You've had a very interesting career trajectory also over the last few years, straddling different roles, right? So where are you seeing a lot of interest in deploying blockchain? Because it seems to it's often most folks assume or just associated with crypto. Sure. But there's a lot more applications around it. What are you seeing the different spaces in which blockchain is gaining traction?
True. I think the go-to with the birth of blockchain was the finance sector. But us as a company, we tend to focus purely within the government sector. We work within the humanitarian sector. Digital ID seems to be the fundamental of what's being built on top of blockchain technology. And a lot of governments, especially governments in the developing world, are using this technology as a platform to leapfrog legacy. So you kind of bypass existing systems and having to build sort of an iteration of what they have. They're using this technology to kind of bypass all of that. Some of the great use cases we are seeing built, we did a project with a government in India through the UN, which is a land registry that was essentially empowering the citizen back to the ownership of the property. I just returned from Afghanistan right now, where they have massive issues with corruption, verification of police officers and whatnot. So governments are using these systems to digitally identify the individual, asset tracking, and then sort of asset verification and then tracking of that asset. So this goes a long way with supply chain and whatnot. But also internally, there's a lot of things that could be done within an organization, within a government to optimize, right? There's hundreds of duplicate emails, hundreds of duplicate documents being sent. I go to 10 departments to get myself verified, and each time I go, I have to fill in a form or whatnot. So optimizing starts internally, and then there's the external facing that could be done as well. So
for folks who aren't familiar, Chami, what is the added layer that blockchain provides apart from your standard e-government, right? Where you have everything is connected with your NIC number, let's say here, and the systems talk to each other. Which one would assume it's the gold standard might be Singapore, where all of these are connected, the databases are connected. So what is the layer that blockchain provides on top of this that makes it that much more efficient for folks who may not be familiar with
Sure.
that?
So I think Singapore and Estonia are doing a fantastic job. Estonia started this journey quite a while ago. But what they've still built is a centralized system. So that data cannot be ported when they travel. So if someone has ownership of a property in a country, you can't go to another country and then get a bank loan based on that asset because it hasn't been verified. If I see a GP within 5 GP clinics in Toronto, they have great centralized systems. Each GP has to verify me, and I'm not able to take my data with me. So the Singapore system is fantastic. Estonia has built a fantastic system, but we're moving towards a very digital nomadic lifestyle with citizens that are moving quite fluidly across different nations, digital e-commerce and whatnot. For that to be highly effective, we need to be in an interoperable blockchain-like world, if you like.
So draw us a picture of a real life case. For example, let's say the ID or the project in Afghanistan, whatever you're free to talk about.
Sure.
What does that really look like?
Sure.
Because it's hard for some of us to understand how this would actually work in order to as you said, make traceability and verification. So make it real for us, help us understand.
Do you want me to talk about a digital ID example?
Maybe, that might be a digital ID. So tell us how that would
Sure.
that would look like in practice.
Sure. I think so. I mean, in my case specifically, so we travel a lot. We have to get different types of vaccinations. I see GPs. I have a credit history in a certain country, but that only applies in that certain country. And as soon as I leave that country, I've lost all of my data. So I don't have a credit history anymore. I don't have my credentials that are verified anymore. I don't have my vaccinations that are approved anymore. And that's even if I was to travel between developed countries like cross-border between the US and Canada. Forget me traveling from Sri Lanka to Canada, right? So this causes huge problems. And I think if we were to have a unified blockchain ID, if you like, and so that ID forms the fundamental of that. And then these attestations are added on top of that. So an attestation could be my medical records. An attestation could be my credit history. When I travel between countries, I have been verified. Just to give you an example, a nurse in Australia or Canada, within each state, if they were to travel, they're unable to get themselves verified. But it seems to be such an obvious thing, right? And they can't do that because central databases have that issue of you can't share that data within each jurisdiction. Whereas if you were to share this data on a distributed database system, that makes it a lot more plausible.
Okay. So you have the advantage of having worked also with regulators in different contexts and in previous roles. You understand the mind of regulators. And of course, there's a spectrum of regulators who are much more progressive. For example, the Monetary Authority of Singapore has actually joined as observer, I think, on some of these blockchain trade finance consortiums like R3. And then you have other regulators who are much more anxious. But in general, regulators are anxious of these new things. And in your interactions with regulators in developing countries as well as in developed countries in North America, etc., what are you seeing as their reaction and their response? Are they welcoming it? Are they over anxious and not getting on board? What are you seeing with the regulators?
Sure. Going back a few years, there was the discussions around does regulation kill innovation? When it comes to blockchain specifically, I think we need to clearly understand there aren't three distinctly defined categories, but there's cryptocurrency, there's ICO or initial coin offerings, and there's the core technology, which is blockchain. So the ICO, as far as ICOs go, I don't want to form an opinion on that, but regulators are clamping down because a lot of it seems to be a scam or quite fraudulent. As far as the technology of cryptocurrency goes, that's a separate regulatory discussion. But as far as the core technology goes, we're finding, so for example, when we work on a government project, we actually invite the different regulators involved into that discussion. So regulators have been quite skeptical, rightfully so. But I think the more we empower them, the more we educate them. And you're quite right in saying Singapore has been quite leading in this space. I mean, they set up a fintech hub for blockchain a couple of years ago. They were very active in playing a part in the Ethereum blockchain. I would love to see more and more regulators, instead of watching from afar or reacting, to be more proactive setting up a sandbox, learning, because the regulatory landscape is now looking at a very innovative solution with an accountant or lawyer hat. Right? You need to have that technology hat to understand the technology, to see how you regulate.
Okay. And in our last couple of seconds, where do you think this is going to go in the next 5 years? Zooming ahead, what's the one thing that you think you'd like to see, and particularly blockchain for social good, 5 years from now?
Sure. A few things, if I may. We'd love to see total digitization of government and the corporate sector as well. Digital ID, a true digital ID system where someone could port their data as they travel fluidly across nations. Supply chain is quite a broken system. We'd like to see global supply chains whereby not just the bigger players, but smaller players in smaller markets in Mongolia or markets in Sri Lanka are able to participate in global markets. Cryptocurrency is another thing maybe we'd like to see governments adopting their form of cryptocurrency or digital currency so that it's transparent. We set the rules so that we can control the inflation or government manipulation of those currencies. I think those are the things that we are seeing, at least based on the governments that we're working with. In the next 5 to 10 years, I would say optimistically, we could see this happen.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Chami, for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Anushka.
So that's it for this edition of The Front Row. We were with Chami Akmeemana of the Blockchain Learning Group and Blockscale Solutions. I hope you got a good idea of where this technology is headed, but I think there are a lot of exciting applications for Sri Lanka, and I hope we get to have more conversations on this. So see you next time on The Front Row.